Make this official. And so, Andy, if you want to share your screen anytime, that's fine while I'm talking here and introducing you. But welcome tonight, everybody, Andi McNair. And Andi was a classroom teacher for 16 years before pursuing her passion to change education by sharing practical ways to engage and empower today's gifted learners. She was named one of the top people in education to watch in 2016 by the Academy of Education, Arts, and Sciences. She's currently a digital innovation and gifted education specialist at ESC Region 12 in Waco, Texas. As a published author, some of her books include Genius Hour, Passion Projects that Ignite Innovation and Student Inquiry, A Meaningful Mess, A Teacher's Guide to Student-Driven Classrooms, Authentic Learning, Student Empowerment, and Keeping It All Together Without Losing Your Mind, and Designing for Depth, a framework for purposeful differentiation. Andi is grateful for her time spent serving learners as a classroom teacher and now appreciates the opportunity to serve educators as she shares practical ways to make learning both manageable and meaningful. And we're so happy to have you here with us tonight, Andi. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mark, so much. I am so excited to be here and looking forward to sharing this idea of gifted onboarding and what this can look like for families and what it can look like for educators. So, thank you for the introduction, and I guess we'll just jump right in. Yes?
Yep. Yep.
That's what we're doing. Okay. All right. Well, I am so excited to talk to you guys in Colorado. I'm in Texas, and I was telling them earlier, it's a little bit cold here, and we all freak out a little bit when it gets cold. So, good times here in Texas for sure. But I am looking forward to having this conversation. I think it's a really important conversation, whether you are a parent of a gifted learner, maybe an educator of gifted learners, or if you're just like curious about what do gifted learners need and how can we serve them well. I think this is a really important conversation. So before we get started, I always like to share my core beliefs because I think it's really important that we as educators identify these and say them out loud. These are the things that I believe every learner deserves. First of all, I believe that every learner deserves an opportunity to experience new learning. I don't think a kid should ever have to sit through something that they already know. I also think that every learner deserves an opportunity to learn from productive struggle, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in our time together. I believe that every learner deserves the opportunity to learn by doing, to share their work beyond the walls of the classroom. And then finally, because of my work with Genius Hour, I believe that every learner deserves an opportunity to pursue their passion and purpose during the school day. So as we go through, I think you'll see some of these core beliefs pop up. They're just the things that fuel the work that I do. And look, we all have core beliefs. You guys have core beliefs. You have things that you believe that your learner deserves. If you're a family member of a gifted learner, if you're an educator, you have things that you believe that your learner needs. And so thinking through these are really important. And if you haven't ever taken the time to identify your core beliefs and to really think through them and write them down, I would encourage you to do so. Knowing what these are give me the opportunity to have really important conversations, and it puts me in a position to where I know these and they're not changing. So these are just the things I'm not willing to waver on. I also want to say that if you can hear my dog barking in the background, I'm really sorry. Somebody must be walking by. Hopefully she'll settle in just a second. Okay. All right, so core beliefs, really important. A little bit about me and my story as an educator, just so you can kind of know where I'm coming from and why I'm so passionate about this work. Look, I'm a mom of gifted learners, and I also worked with gifted learners for several years before going into the work that I do now, which is being given the opportunity to serve educators. But I was a traditional teacher for a really long time. I knew how to play the game well, is what I like to say. I knew how to get good test scores. I had good relationships with the kids. But the reality is, what I was doing in my classroom wasn't meaningful for my learners. And so, what that looked like for me was it was almost as if somebody turned the lights off, right? I was doing the work, I was kind of in the trenches doing all the things, and then all of a sudden it was like I lost every bit of passion that I had for teaching and the work. And it seriously was just like the lights went out. And I had to find a way to come out of that. I had to find a way to find my passion for the work again. I had to figure out a way to make learning meaningful for my learners and make my classroom a place that not only they wanted to be, but that I wanted to be. And as that began to be my reality, I began to have to get more, I had to, innovation had to be a priority. So I always like to say, I kind of had to transition from being a traditional teacher that did what was easy to becoming an innovative educator that did what was best. And in that work, I began to really see what gifted learners needed and how, regardless of what systematically was happening, we had to start advocating for these kids and thinking about what do they need and how can we serve them well so that school is a place that they want to be, right? And that they're willing to invest. So I always tell this story, and when I talk about gifted onboarding, and I'm always like, why are you telling people this? They probably don't need to know. But look, I'm just going to tell it. I'm just going to be totally transparent. So I was shopping, Christmas shopping a couple of years ago, and I always say I don't really struggle with my ADHD. Other people struggle with my ADHD, and this is a perfect example of that. So I was out shopping, doing all the things. I was very hyper fixated on getting the things that I needed at Best Buy. And I walked out of Best Buy, had all of the things. I was very excited because I got all the things that I went in for. I came out, I got in a car that I thought was mine, and you can probably see where this is going. I got all the way in, sat in the driver's seat, and I looked over in the passenger seat, and there was someone sitting next to me. And I had gone to Best Buy alone. And she was eating a Subway sandwich. I'll never forget. She was mid-bite. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I was like, this isn't my car, is it? And she was not afraid at all. I'm obviously not a very scary person. There was no fear in her eyes, but she just kind of smiled and she was like, no, it is not. And I just remember that feeling of feeling like I was in the wrong place and realizing like, ugh, this is really uncomfortable. And the reason I tell you that story is number one, it's a great story, but number two, honestly, I think if we don't make gifted onboarding a priority, I think that's how some of our gifted learners feel. I think they get put into a gifted program or gifted services or whatever it is that it is that they're getting at their campus, their district, and then all of a sudden there's this feeling of like, is this where I belong? And they could look over at somebody next to them and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm not like this person, or this feels very uncomfortable. And gifted onboarding is an opportunity for us to avoid that feeling a little bit. It may be there some, but I think without making that a priority, oftentimes it feels like they get into the car, they look around and they think, gosh, this is not where I belong. And so we're going to talk about kind of how we can help with that, whether you're a family member, educator, whatever that is. Let's just start with the definition of onboarding. I'm a word person. I like words. And if I'm going to use words, I want to be really clear what they mean. So the definition of onboarding is this action or process of integrating a new employee into an organization or familiarizing a new customer or client with one's products or services. Look, that's really important. That idea of familiarizing someone with what they're about to experience. I think about when I transitioned from the classroom to going to work at an education service center. And when I went to work for our education service center here in Waco, Texas, is where I live. And there was an onboarding process, right? There was this opportunity to sit down with somebody and they said like, hey, here's our vision and mission and here's what you're going to be doing and here's the role you're going to play. And I remember walking to my car that day. I got in the right car that day, but I remember walking to my car that day and thinking like, oh gosh, like I'm a part of something. Like this is good. This feels good. I know what I'm getting into. I know what they expect from me. I know what I expect from them. Like that onboarding process really prepared me for the work that I was going to be doing. And look, I'm saying a lot of our gifted learners don't get that onboarding process. And because that's not there, there's not that clarity of what's happening. There begin to be some assumptions that start to be made. And so let's kind of talk about that. Here's the gifted onboarding framework. You guys can see the image here. I started thinking about this last summer and then created this idea of gifted onboarding and then a gifted onboarding framework. When I did some research into onboarding for businesses and companies, they oftentimes talk about pillars. And I thought, gosh, that makes a lot of sense. I think if we were going to think through the gifted onboarding pillars, they would probably be clarity, community, content, and challenge. And we're going to go through and talk about each one of those quickly. But the goal is for our gifted learners to really have that sense of, number one, understanding why am I here? And number two, understanding what their gifted journey is going to look like. So this is just kind of an introduction. This is what it looks like. We're going to go through each one individually. I want to say that I'm a big fan of talking about the 8 Great Gripes from Judy Galbraith. And look, I also want to say that these were created in 1985. It's 2025. That was almost 40 years ago, which is crazy to say out loud. And also makes my stomach hurt a little bit that was that long ago. But as we think about that idea, if these were the great gripes in 1985, and I think most of us can look at these as family members or as educators and recognize that these are still the same. These are still the same thing that gifted learners are saying every day. And I think there we have to take some ownership in that and say, like, there should be some movement. Like, there has to be something, there has to be at some point these shouldn't be the gripes anymore, is what I'm trying to say. At some point we should be able to say, like, man, we've finally created a space for gifted learners where they don't feel like what happens in school is too easy and too boring. Or we finally created enough understanding around giftedness that there's not teasing about them being smart. But we're not there yet, right? And so thinking through, how can we make these gifted gripes not just something that we talk about and put on a slide like so many of us do, but how can we have those big conversations to actually move the needle and create some change? I know Mark has talked about this before, and I think this is so important for us to say that there are a lot of people who were gifted. They think they were just gifted in school, right? That are gifted now. I was actually at a conference and they were talking about how they had gone and talked to some legislators, and the legislators actually said things to them like, oh, yeah, I used to be gifted, or I was gifted in elementary school. Well, those comments in and of themselves tell us that even some of the people who are making decisions about what gifted learners receive and what happens when a learner is identified as gifted, there's not clarity around what that is. And so I only say that because not that that's anybody's fault, not that that's their fault. It's the reality that we have to be clearer about this. And clarity is the first pillar in the gifted onboarding framework. And I always say, people have asked me a couple of times, like, gosh, is there a pillar that's more important than any of the others? And I would say, no, absolutely not. But the clarity pillar is first for a reason. I do think it has to happen first, not that it's more important, but it does have to happen first. So here we go. Question for the clarity pillar is, how will we help gifted learners and their families understand giftedness as they navigate the gifted learning journey? If you are looking at this as a family member, I would say your question could be, how will we help our gifted learner understand giftedness as they navigate their gifted journey? So whether you're looking at this as an educator or a family member of a gifted learner, clarity has to be a priority. And the reality is it's a two-way street, right? The learner and their families, they should have clarity about the gifted experience, but also we as educators have to have clarity about the gifted learner and their family. So as you're watching this, like, that's why that partnership is so important between gifted learners and their families and the school system. That all of those parts are important, and they have to work together to do what's best for the gifted learner. So I think this is important to say out loud. Once a learner is identified as gifted, the first thing that should be provided is clarity. And I think we sometimes forget that. I think we move right into, okay, you're gifted, so you're going to be put into this class, or you're gifted, you're going to be pulled out for this many minutes. And oftentimes that happens before a gifted learner even knows what it means to be gifted. And when that happens, when it starts to feel like it's top secret, that's where the great gripes start coming into play. That's when they start saying out loud, like, hey, wait a second, nobody's even explaining to me what giftedness is. I don't even know what it is, right? It's kept a big secret. And that's the first great gripe. And so I think about it all of the time. It shouldn't feel like that. It shouldn't be a secret. Our gifted learners should not only know why they're in gifted services, but what that giftedness is and how they can grow in it. So I think it's important to also acknowledge that if clarity isn't provided, confusion is going to happen. So if there's not clarity, somewhere along the way, there's going to be confusion. And when that confusion happens, if you're a family member, you may know what that feels like. Like, gosh, I remember being a little bit confused when I got the letter, or I found out that my learner was identified as gifted. Or maybe you're an educator and you're just like, gosh, I don't know that we provide that clarity, or I don't know that I have that clarity of understanding exactly what that means. And so, as I said, when that clarity isn't there, assumptions start to happen. So our gifted learners may start to think things, or their families may start to believe that, hey, being gifted must mean that I'm really smart, right? Or it must mean that I'm supposed to be on the A honor roll all the time. We start getting into unrealistic expectations being gifted must mean that I'm good at school, right? Most of us know nothing could be further from the truth. That does not have to be the case. I always like to say, high achievers oftentimes play the school game well, and a high achiever can be a gifted learner. But high achievers don't have to be gifted, and gifted learners don't have to be high achievers. And if we think about that, so often I think the assumption is made that if a learner is gifted, they should play the school game well. And I just want to say out loud, that is not always going to be the case. In fact, oftentimes when those assumptions begin to happen, I think these things start to kind of show up, pop up. Not that they might not pop up anyway. These 100% could be, there could be another source of this, another reason that it happens. It could just be part of who they are and some things they're having to work through. But I do think that oftentimes when those assumptions are made, our gifted learners can begin to believe they're supposed to be perfect, or they can begin to have that imposter syndrome of like, oh gosh, at some point everybody's going to figure out I'm not who they think I am, right? I'm not this really smart kid, or I'm not as gifted as they think I am. And if they find that out, like something really bad's going to happen. And so imposter syndrome can be really hard for kids to work through. Emotional intensity plays a role in that. Not that it's caused by any of that, but I do think emotional intensity is something that a lot of our gifted learners deal with. And there needs to be clarity around understanding what that is and leaning into the experts to learn how to best serve that and how to understand how to work with those kids. Gifted kid burnout, gosh, that's a big deal and definitely a conversation we should be having right now. And I think that when you look gifted kid burnout up on social media, I think there's this realization of like, man, there just wasn't clarity for that kid around what giftedness was or what it should look like. And then underachievement is another thing that just has to be dealt with, understood, and things we want to think about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I know if you're watching, you probably already know this, but I do think that it's important when we're providing clarity to be really clear about this, what giftedness is. And so I'm going to give you just a second to read this from NAGC, our national organization for gifted children. And then I think it's important that we also address not just what giftedness is, but also what giftedness isn't, right? Good grades, compliant behavior, guaranteed success, probably not going to happen. Right answers. And that idea, if you're watching this as a family member or as an educator, you know that last one is not typically true. They're not always easy to teach. They're not always easy to parent. And I think we have to be really clear about not just what giftedness is, but also what giftedness isn't. If you're watching this right now and you're thinking, gosh, how can I really kind of get clarity around who my kid is or what their strengths are or what they want to be? I'm a big fan of the tool Thrively. They have a free resource on there, whether you're a parent or as an educator, it's for both. And it's just called the Strengths Assessment. And that Strengths Assessment gives your learner the opportunity to answer several questions. It does take a while, but if they get tired or they don't want to answer all the questions, it saves their progress so they can go back and complete it. But in Thrively, they can answer those questions and it will give you a report and tell you what their strengths are, what they're interested in, and what they aspire to be. And gosh, that's really good information to know about a kid because it gives us the opportunity to have clarity about who they are. So I want to give you in each section, I want to give you a few practical things to think about. I think as far as clarity goes, it's a really good idea to talk about gifted individuals that your learners may know. Taylor Swift, right? Everybody knows her. But when you look at her journey, there really was this element of giftedness there. And then that ability that she's had to use that for good. Amanda Gorman, just a whole nother level of giftedness. And then the Pommel Horse King, right, for the USA team. They all have different types of gifts and they've used them in different types of ways. And I think having that conversation with our learners can be really powerful. So just talking about that as you're watching movies, as you're watching musicians, as you're talking about what giftedness is and how people are using their giftedness around us. I also like the idea of always engaging in an onboarding experience, letting learners engage in like a collaborative challenge, like a puzzle or a riddle, a teamwork activity, because that gives us an opportunity to gain clarity around how they respond to challenge. Even on family game nights, right at home, paying attention to, hey, how does my gifted kiddo respond when maybe they don't win, or maybe they don't know the answer, or they don't solve the puzzle? How do they respond to that? That gives us clarity into who they are and maybe some of the conversations that we need to be having. Okay, second pillar. We spent a lot of time on clarity because, frankly, it's first, and I really do think it's huge. But the second pillar is also really important, and that is community. And the question here is how will we create a sense of community that will ensure gifted learners feel seen and supported? This is key at school and beyond. And if I were a family member right now, my question would probably be how can I create a sense of community for my gifted learner? How can I help them see giftedness around them so that they don't think I was gifted in elementary school or they don't think I used to be gifted? Look, I'm a huge fan of Robert Sternberg's work of transformational giftedness. I think this is a really important conversation right now as in the gifted community. And his work is around this idea that there's transactional giftedness and there's transformational giftedness. And transactional giftedness is this idea that we give you the gifted label, and then you give us something in return. So you find out you're gifted, you go to a prestigious college. You find out you're gifted, you stay on the A honor roll. Those types of things. Like there's that transaction, right? But transformational giftedness, he explains this way. He says that it seeks to make a positive, meaningful, and possibly enduring difference on the world. And look, I worry that for too long we've been in that transactional phase of giftedness, of we give you that label and we in return expect things that may actually not be reality, right? That might not be their path. But if we could just for a minute, maybe not, maybe for more than a minute, but if we could really start to think through designing gifted services with this in mind, with Robert Sternberg's work in mind of transformational giftedness and us giving them that opportunity to make meaningful, positively enduring differences in the world, that would be huge, right? Because they would start to see their giftedness beyond the classroom and not feel like it just has to mean that I'm good at school. So I think that one of the eight great gifted gripes that's really tied to this idea is we feel too different and wish people would accept us for who we are. When they don't see giftedness in their community, when they only see it or feel it at school, that's how they start to feel. But if we could give them the opportunity to interact with the community, like maybe some of their gifted peers. I love the idea if you're a teacher of gifted learners, of having like I don't know, middle school kids talk to the elementary kids about their gifted experience. High school kids talk to the middle school kids about their gifted experience and have those gifted peers who can say, like, oh gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about, or I experienced that and here's how I work through it. Mentors in their areas of interest, that's huge. Teachers and specialists. I have a good friend, Stephanie Higgs, aka Little Miss Gifted, on Instagram. And when she learned about the gifted onboarding idea, I had shared it on Instagram. And she actually invited some of the teachers on her campus, librarians, anybody on her campus who was gifted, she invited them in to talk to our gifted class. And she said, as they came in and shared, now there's like this understanding between that gifted person on our campus and my gifted learners that like, ooh, we're the same. Like, and they're getting to see like, oh, they're still gifted and they're doing this work and this is what it looks like outside of school. And so teachers and specialists, community leaders, right? How are they using their gifts? How are they using their giftedness to lead? Parents and family members, alumni of gifted programs. You guys can see the list. I don't have to read it to you. But there's just so many different ways that we can connect our gifted learners with the community, and that's really important. And so, like family members, even as you're like driving by maybe the Capitol in your town or maybe the courthouse or whatever it is, just having conversations about leadership. When you see something that someone has created, talking about, man, that creativity and that being a gift that that person had and how they were able to use it to create something that's going to have a lasting impact on the world. It's just those easy conversations that just start to kind of put that in their mind of, oh, hey, giftedness is all around me, right? I see other people that are not just in school that are using their giftedness in positive ways. If you invite people to talk to your gifted learners, like if you have them come in and maybe be an outside expert for your class, giving them the opportunity to talk about the challenges of being gifted, the power of being gifted, right? The exciting parts of it, the gifted journey, like what does that look like? And maybe giftedness beyond the classroom. What does that look like once you're not in school? And how can you continue to utilize your gifts for good? So thinking through that. All right, the third pillar, we're going really fast, you guys. I need a Dr. Pepper. But the third pillar is content. And so if you're a family member, I am going to have something here for you. This really is more for if you're an educator, if you're in a classroom, this is important. But if you're a family member, stay tuned because I'm going to talk to you about how you can use this pillar as well. What content will be offered to provide gifted learners with opportunities to explore and engage in new and meaningful learning experiences? Basically, like what's inside. I think so often people see a gifted service, they see gifted services as like this shiny box, but it's not until your learner is in the gifted program and they're getting to experience it that you get to see like, hey, what's inside of here? What are they actually doing? What are they learning? So if you are part of a gifted services program, if you have leadership in that or you make decisions, I think it's a really good idea to sit down and think about, hey, what are the like boxes that we have? What are the different containers that are in our gifted services and what's inside, right? If you were going to look at this picture, I like the idea of just putting this picture up and you guys as a team just looking through it and say, what's in this box? What's in this box? What's in this box? And what needs to stay and what needs to go? What's giving our learners the biggest return on their investment? And what's giving us as educators the biggest return on ours? So considering what's in those boxes as far as gifted content goes is really important. When I think about content and gifted learners, and I think about the 8th grade gifted grads, I think about this one, and it might be a little bit confusing, but hang with me. I'm going to help you understand why this is the case. One of the gripes is that gifted learners worry a lot about world problems and they feel helpless to do anything about them, right? It's like, gosh, we know all of these things going on. And sometimes they can see a solution or they can at least see a different perspective or a new way to think about that. But sometimes they feel like, gosh, nobody's given us the opportunity to do anything about it. And I'm going to talk about you. I'm going to talk not about you. I'm going to talk to you about how we can solve that problem in just a second. But when you think about your content, I think it's important that we ask 3 questions. When you think about those boxes, what's in the box? Why is it there? Why is it part of our gifted services? And how is it being delivered, right? How are we giving that to our learners? And are we doing so in a meaningful way? Is there a better way to deliver that content? And when I talk about Genius Hour and passion projects, I oftentimes talk about a gifted services. I oftentimes talk about a Genius Hour purpose statement. So our learners have to say, I want to learn more about this by doing this so that I can this, right? I like the idea of having a gifted services purpose statement and being able to say, like, hey, in our gifted services, our learners are going to do this by doing this so that they can this. Because in that one statement, you have the what, you have the how, and you have the why. And I think when you can really lean on that and you really know, and families know the how, the what, and the why, I think that provides some of that clarity that we talked about earlier that is so important. So how do we do that? How do we address that gripe that I talked about, that giving them that opportunity to do something about some of the things that they see happening in the world are just small problems that maybe they want to solve in their community or maybe that they want to solve at home. I love the idea of passion projects. It's a lot of the work that I do to talk about Genius Hour. I talk often about family passion projects, and I also talk about classroom passion projects. Look, if I have to answer the question, what do you think curriculum or content should look like gifted learners? I 100% think that purposeful passion projects, also known as Genius Hour, should be a part of that because number one, it gives them an opportunity to lean into their strengths. Number two, it gives them an opportunity to experience productive struggle. And it also helps them really see, like, gosh, I really can impact some things around me. I can create change. I can impact someone in a positive way. I can innovate. I can do something better than maybe it's been done before. And so, passion projects are a great thing to consider for your family if you want to work on a family passion project or for your classroom. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm going to give you my contact information. I have some specific websites that you can visit and get more information, or I'd love to just have a conversation with you. So make sure you check that out. But man, I could just spend the rest of our time talking about that, but I won't because I know we got to get through the rest of our time. This is how I talk about passion projects or Genius Hour. Learners start with their passion and purpose. They plan their project out. They pitch their idea to their peers or to their family, and then they work on a project to develop a product and ultimately give a presentation. So again, if you want to know more about that framework and kind of what that looks like, I would be happy to share that with you. You've got to contact me. I'm not going to call you, right? So you guys get a hold of me somehow, and we can definitely have some conversation around that. Okay, last pillar that I'm going to talk about is challenge. And gosh, if as a family you kind of set back a little bit when we talked about content, you need to lean back in right here because challenge is really important for our gifted learners and for us to make a priority as family members and for us to make a priority in the classroom. The question here, how will we ensure that gifted learners experience productive struggle and are appropriately challenged throughout the school day? And I think we could say the same thing at home. Like, how will we ensure that my gifted learner experiences productive struggle at home? How will I make sure that no, I'm not uncomfortable with them being challenged or I'm not uncomfortable with that productive struggle? I'm going to give you a second to read this. I love this definition of productive struggle, and then we'll talk about it. So I would ask you to consider some of the words that stand out to you here. Look, I didn't write this definition. My best friend ChatGPT wrote this definition, but it's a really good definition of productive struggle. I love that whole idea of actively grappling because I think we've gotten to this place where learning has become a little bit passive, right? It's being done to them. That's not really what learning looks like. Learning should be active. And that idea of actively grappling with something, with a challenging task, is important. And look, it's obvious that I'm a fan of like the whole what, how, and why idea. And this definition gives us that. We're talking about productive struggle. That's the what. How does it happen? Through actively grappling with challenging tasks or problems. And then why do we do that? Not because it's a buzzword in education. We don't do it because, we're jerks. Like productive struggle is important because it deepens their understanding. It gives them an opportunity to develop new skills. And so I think that connects with the eight great gripes in that the stuff we do in school is too easy and too boring. And that's become such a thing that some of our gifted learners are uncomfortable with struggle because they've just like bought into this idea of things should be easy and boring. And if they're not, right, if things aren't easy for me, then something must be wrong with me. That's not true. Right? If something isn't challenging, that's on us as educators, or maybe even us at home. Like they should be challenged. There should be opportunities for them to experience obstacles is the word I'm trying to say. Okay. So I love goal setting, but I found that like when we think about things like SMART goals, there's some other examples, but those all focus on the goals themselves. And I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing. If you want to use SMART goals, I think that's a good idea. But I also think that it's important that we have some sort of goal setting framework that represents the learner, right? And so that's what this does. I created this framework just to help us think differently about goals and help our learners think differently about goals. I like the idea of using this at home and also using it at school. So basically, just asking before a kid goes to attempt something or to do something that they would like to be successful at, asking these questions like, hey, how do you need to grow in order to move forward in this? Like, what are some skills that you're going to need to gain? That's that growth mindset. Like you may not be there yet, and that's okay. O is really important. What obstacles do I need to overcome to move toward achieving this goal? So I'm just identifying there's going to be obstacles, things are going to be hard. How do I move past those? A would be what strengths do I need to apply? That goes back to that Thrively idea. If they've identified what those strengths are, they can think through, hey, which ones of those are going to be most beneficial in what I'm about to attempt to do? And then L is what do I need to learn to move forward? Like what information do I need to move toward achieving this goal? Notice I didn't say to move to, I didn't say to achieve this goal. I said to move toward achieving this goal because there's no guarantee that they're going to actually achieve the goal. But we want them to see that when they're goal setting, we're talking about moving towards something. It's why I'm such a fan of this idea of yards gained. I was watching football with my husband not too long ago, and look, I'm not a football fan. I wouldn't lie and say that I know a lot about it, but I did notice that in a football game, people don't just cheer when there's a touchdown scored. People cheer anytime there is forward movement. And I was watching that game with my husband. I was like, you know what? And first of all, he's not an educator, so he's always like, I don't really care. But I love that he listens to me anyway. But I said, hey, I love that they can go 1 yard, right? But if that 1 yard results in a first down, he'd be so proud of me using this vocabulary right now. But if that 1 yard results in a first down, like people are stoked, they're excited, they're jumping up and down. And I don't know that we do that enough for our gifted learners. I think sometimes we're so focused on the touchdown that we're just waiting for it. Like we're waiting for the A honor roll, we're waiting for the big college acceptance, and those are touchdowns and they're exciting, and you should get excited. But I'm saying this, if you were at a football game and you were sitting there or you were playing a football game and nobody cheered until you scored the touchdown, I would imagine that playing that game would be a little less motivating. But the fact that people cheer every time you gain yards is what keeps you moving toward the touchdown. So I'm saying we've got to cheer. We've got to help our learners understand that yards gained is movement toward that touchdown. So I love the idea of, as a parent or as an educator, just sometimes walking by your kid and being like, dude, yards gained, right? Like we're not there yet. It's not a touchdown, but I see you. I see you working hard and I see the yards that you're gaining. We're getting closer and closer to that touchdown every day. So just having that vocabulary as a family to just like, hey, every once in a while to my kids, I'm just going to say yards gained because that means you're moving forward and that's just as valuable as a touchdown. All right, I'm going to wrap up our time together with giving you 3 quick ways you can talk about struggle without giving the lecture of struggle. So whether you're a teacher or a family member, this can be really valuable because I'll tell you what, this generation of kids, they don't like lectures and they don't like to hear the same thing over and over again. And they've heard a lot about productive struggle. I do want to say this real quickly. There's a difference between productive struggle and frustration, right? Productive struggle is forward movement. Frustration is when emotion becomes involved. And I think we have to know the difference between the two and kind of how to deal with those. But let's talk about, first of all, how do we get our learners to be willing to engage in the struggle? I think this is a really great story to tell. So, somebody told me recently this wasn't a buffalo, it's like an American bison. And so just let's just pretend it's a buffalo right now because I forgot to change the video. But I don't even, maybe those are the same thing. But buffalo, oftentimes, if you don't know this, cattle, when there is a storm coming, will actually turn and go away from the storm, right? They're like, "Oop, storm coming. We're all going to go as a herd the opposite direction." However, buffalo, when there is a storm coming, they turn and go right into the storm. And they instinctively know if we go straight towards the storm, if we walk right into it, like we're going to get to the other side a lot faster and we're probably going to be better for it. Right. And so I love using that analogy with your kiddos of telling them that story. There's tons of things on Instagram, TikTok. You could let them watch this idea. But that idea of just like be a buffalo, right? Like we are going to be a buffalo when there is struggle coming, when there's something difficult in front of us. We're not going to be like the cattle and turn and go the other way. We're going to be like the buffalo and turn and go straight toward it. So once they're in it, you want them to be able to keep walking through it, right? And so I don't know if you guys know this or not, but when a butterfly is coming out of its chrysalis, I said cocoon at a science conference, I about got booed off stage. So it's a chrysalis. When a butterfly is coming out of its chrysalis, it starts doing like this really weird thing with its wings. And when it does that, it's a little concerning. Like you think to yourself, like, it's a butterfly. It should know how to get out of its chrysalis. And for me, like when I watch that happen, I want to help it. Like, can I just like cut a little slit and help it out? Or could I just like tug its little legs? But look, if you do that, if you take away that moment of struggle, a butterfly actually can't fly beyond that environment because what's happening in that moment is it's pumping, I think, fluid through its wings or it's building its muscles. But if that doesn't happen, that weird moment, it can't fly beyond that environment. And look, I think sometimes as family members and parent and educators, we do that to gifted learners. We're like, they're gifted. Like they should know how to do this. Let me just help them out a little bit. Let me just cut a little sled. Like I'm telling you, if we do that, they may be able to play the school game. What they may be the valedictorian. They may be on the A honor roll from kindergarten through 12th grade. We may save them every time. But if we do all of that and those kids graduate and can't be successful beyond the walls of the classroom, what was it for? Right? We have to let them have that moment of struggle because they're building those muscles. They're doing the thing that will help them be successful beyond the walls of the classroom. All right, the last thing that I'm going to share with you guys, and we may not watch the whole thing, but I'm going to share a little bit of it. And Mark, if for some reason my sound doesn't work, let me know because I'm not sure I pushed the right button. But we're going to watch a little bit of this and then we're going to wrap it up and call it a day. But this is a really great example of productive struggle and how we can deal with it. Promise there's a happy ending for the panic. Okay, so like literally rock bottom, right? Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And I love that the mama bear is just like, well, that took longer than I anticipated. Let's go. I love that. And a really good motivational video. And I'll make sure that I put the link. I wanted you guys to see kind of who that was from. Okay, so I'll make sure to share the link to that so you guys can check it out. I'm gonna go here and here so you guys can. So I like this idea of just sharing those with your learners and making sure that you use that vocabulary of be a buffalo, be a butterfly, and be a bear. I think that can be really, really powerful for sure, and definitely something to check out. Look, the last thing that I want to say to you guys is we were in, this for just a second, we were in Oklahoma not too long ago with my family, and we went to this place called the Maze. And me and my family, we have two college kids, and one who's graduated college, one who's in college, and a senior right now. But we went to this maze thing, and I couldn't help as we were walking through the thing that I think this is how some of our gifted learners feel, right? Like it's just, it feels like giftedness is hard to figure out. And it feels like every time they turn, there's a wall or there's another barrier. It's so hard to understand. And there were these lookouts. And I feel like these pillars of gifted onboarding can be those lookouts, those opportunities we can kind of give them to see the whole picture of being giftedness and what that means. So if you want to learn more about onboarding, you can check out my website, andymcnair.com/gifted onboarding. There's definitely lots of stuff there you can check out as an educator or as a family. Contact information is there. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram. My email is there if you want to connect with me that way, and my website. But man, I just appreciate this opportunity. Mark, I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share. I know we're going to do some Q&A, but that's the end of my presentation. So I just wanted to wrap it up. Again, if you guys need anything at all, feel free to contact me that way.
Oh no, so thank you so much. I think every gifted staff should see this, even if it's like we've been doing it for a long time in the classroom as a gifted, we call them gifted resource teachers in our school
Okay.
district. Even if I've been doing it a long time, I think everybody should see this again and just check in. And what
Mm,
are we doing? And how are we doing? And are we doing this? And it's a wonderful gifted 101. I really like how it's onboarding framework, but it's about what is giftedness. This presentation encapsulates that what is
mm.
giftedness too. And so thank you so much for that. Um, I'm going to ask a couple questions here, and then we may end up with some questions here in the chat as well as we're going along. And maybe some of mine aren't necessarily so much questions that can be answered very easily, and maybe it's just a little bit of a chat between you and me even. Um, but the sense of community is so important, for gifted kids, as you said, and that's where you started with. And like what are some ways that we know that we're developing that sense of community? Like what are some indicators that like, yeah, it's working, the kids feel like they're in the right place?
I think when they stop referring to their giftedness in that silo of school, I think when they stop saying things, when they stop making those explicit connections between I'm gifted, so I have to be on the honor roll, or I'm gifted and this is what this looks like at school, when they can begin to see their giftedness beyond the walls of the classroom and what that's going to look like, even beyond college, right? Or beyond what they experience, what's that going to look like in their career? What's that going to look like, how they interact with the world around them? When they can start making those connections, I think that's when the community piece has been done well. But it's hard to see right now. You don't see that in a lot of places because so many of
Yeah.
our gifted kids associate giftedness with school.
Yeah. I love how you keep connecting the classroom and families, and you talk about both of them. And you talk about, I think you said we have to, what'd you say? We have to have
Yeah.
clarity about gifted learners and their families. And sometimes it's hard to put those two things together because depending on what kind of gifted programming we have, right? We might
Yeah.
only see a student 1 hour a week, literally, a gifted
Yeah.
learner, depending on the programming, right? And so, do you have some things in mind about ways to foster that connection between school and family when it might not be a regular classroom teacher who's fostering that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways you can do that. I mean, I love the idea of gifted family nights. And I think you could take these pillars and create a gifted family night around that. Like you could have, a gifted family night where there's a station dedicated to clarity, there's a station dedicated to community, there's a station dedicated to challenge. I think that's a
Mhm.
great thing to do. I had somebody email me not too long ago and they said, hey, I really want to build this onboarding idea into my work seamlessly. And I want to send a newsletter home. Where does that fit in my newsletter? And I thought about it for a while and I messaged her back and I said, I don't think it fits in your newsletter. I think it is your newsletter. So you would
Mhm.
have your newsletter that you send home to families and there would be a clarity piece. I'm going to give them just a little tidbit about gifted learners. This is what you need to know, that gifted 101 piece. And then I'm going to have an opportunity for families to a challenge for the month. Here's what you can do at home to like model productive struggle and watch your learner as they experience that. There could be a community piece. Here's how you can connect with your community. Here's something going on in our library this month you might want to check in. And then the content is what you're doing in class that month. So, I think if we could latch onto this idea of gifted onboarding and really understand that each one of those pieces could be an opportunity for us to communicate with families in a clear and like consistent way, that could be really, really meaningful. So I think family nights, newsletters, and then just like really good calls home, right? Calling home to say
Yeah.
positive things, which is so important. And then just listening to parents talk just as much as we talk to them.
Yeah. In Colorado, we have advanced learning plans and
Yes.
inviting those parents in on those conversations, which we should be doing anyway, right? But that's a
Mhm.
good connection for us. That's a good tool for
Yes.
us.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, one more
Okay.
before we go here. And this
Perfect.
is one of those that I know you're not going to just be like nail down an answer to. But
Okay.
when you mentioned that the eight great gripes have been around for 40 years, I'm like, yeah, that's funny.
Crazy.
I've been around the block too. Of course, I started when I was -3 years old
Of course.
with gifted education. But yeah, I hadn't thought about what you said. I hadn't thought about like those are the same eight great gripes
Hmm.
today. Those are the
Hmm.
same ones.
Hmm.
And I mean, any thoughts about like why we're still there with that? Why?
Yeah, I have had some thoughts about that lately, actually. I this is going to sound terrible, but I really think we've been doing too much small talk. Like we say things like, gosh, how's gifted learning going? Or what are you doing in your class? And I think, Mark, honestly, we've got to like stop with the small talk and start having some big talk. If you Google what big talk is, it really is that opportunity to get beyond just like these small conversations and just say the things and get to the heart of what's going on. And I think if in gifted education, we could really start to get to the big talk conversations. I think at the conferences that we go to, the professional learning experiences, the interactions with families, so that families are able to ask us the big talk questions and us not be uncomfortable. I think that if we could make it a priority to look when we're in these spaces where we're like-minded people doing good work, we're going to have those big talk conversations and lean into those things that we may not know the answer to, but we're better together. And if we could, I don't, you're right. I don't have a specific answer, but if we could make that shift from small talk to big talk right now, I think that would start guiding us in a better direction.
Yeah, love it. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Everybody, don't forget that you can access these recordings on coloradogifted.org. Click on the resource tabs, conversations with CAGT. They go back to 2020 now. And
Wow.
this is a wonderful addition to our archive. And so thank you so much for being here with that one.
Absolutely.